Over the years, the Madden NFL series has lost some of its fan favorite features, but what's interesting about all of this is that not all of those features that were lost were at the hands of EA, but rather by the league that they answer to, the NFL. When you partner with the NFL to use their license, you have to obey their requests of what they do or don't want in the game, as they see the game as a direct representation of their brand. After all, their name, their logos, and everything associated with them is in this game. If they see something in the game that they think is a bad look for their brand or something that they just simply don't want to be associated with at all, they will have EA remove it. We all know the nickname for the NFL is the No Fun League, and when you find out what they've had removed from Madden and why they've had it removed, the nickname will make even more sense than it ever did before. Now, I've done a video like this in the past, but over the years we've gotten more information about things that they've banned from the game and also some more clarity on certain things as well, so I figured it was time to make an updated video on this topic, seeing as a lot of Madden fans are still asking about all of these things to this day, and a lot of people still don't know that the NFL had EA remove these things from their game. Let's start with one of the most common things I see asked about in my comment section all the time. Where are the big hits that made helmets pop off of players? Whatever happened to those hits? It was so cool to hit stick somebody and see their helmet go flying. It really made the impact of the big hits feel more intense. And with the hit stick itself being one of the best features that was ever added to Madden, this just perfectly went hand in hand with it. It felt so rewarding to line a player up perfectly and knock him back into next week as his helmet flew off his head. But as we all know, the helmets don't quite do that anymore in Madden. We haven't seen this in probably over 10 years at this point, maybe more than that. And this was not an EA decision to remove this from the game. This was actually the NFL. This is one of the few things that make sense, I suppose, since they are trying to completely remove themselves from the conversation of being too dangerous, and for years now, they've been trying to avoid head injuries as much as possible. All you have to do is just look at the rule changes in the NFL over the years. You can no longer hit a defenseless receiver, and if a play is too bang bang, you'll likely get flagged for it even if you don't lead with your helmet but instead lead with your shoulder. And even if you don't actually make contact with the head. But if it's too close to call, they're gonna throw the flag every time. Or if it just simply looks bad in real time and it actually isn't, it doesn't matter, the flag is probably still coming out. The NFL simply doesn't like big hits being glorified at all, even though they are a reality of the sport. But in Madden, it doesn't have to be, so they requested that EA remove the helmets popping off of players, even though we still see it happen all the time in the NFL. This feature was removed many years ago and will likely never make a return again. It's actually still surprising to me that the hit stick itself has been able to survive all of this, and in fact, some of the ragdoll hit sticks have gotten even more crazy in Madden, but for some reason having the helmets pop off is just taking it a bit too far in terms of how the NFL sees it. I guess that's just where they draw the line. Now this leads directly into the next thing that the NFL banned from Madden. While we're on the topic of big hits and helmets popping off, what type of injuries are often caused by this? It's the C word that the NFL absolutely hates: concussion injuries. If you've played any level of football, I mean down to just playing in your front yard for many years as a kid, you've probably had one of these at some point. You fell too hard, you accidentally bumped heads with somebody. It's almost impossible to avoid. But the league is trying their hardest to separate themselves from that word, with more and more doctors and specialists coming forward over the years with information about just how dangerous this head injury can be. The NFL would like to do everything in its power to make sure that they don't exist anymore. And we all know that they still happen pretty frequently in real life, but that doesn't mean that they have to happen in Madden. It would be nice to have this in the game for realism along with the concussion protocols like in real life, but the NFL is simply just not going for it. While they can't avoid it in real life, they can control whether or not it's in their video game, so naturally, they're never ever signing off on it again. I do believe head injuries may still happen in the game, but they're pretty rare if they do, and they're never actually called concussions. And to go along with this, another thing that silently went away over the years were career-ending injuries, and while there's been no hard proof that the NFL actually banned this specifically, it's pretty likely the case as it falls in line with the rest of the things that they have banned. Injuries are still in the game, of course, just not the kind that the NFL hates to be associated with, which would be concussions and anything career-ending. Now we're going to keep with the same theme and move on to the next thing that the NFL banned from Madden. This next feature was kind of goofy, to be honest, but Madden fans loved it back in the day. This was one of the biggest fan favorites of all time in Madden, the ambulance. But not just the ambulance itself, really. We still see the cart come out in Madden to take players off the field, which is in line with modern times. But back in the old school days of Madden, whenever you hurt a member of the opposing team badly enough, he would have to get carted off the field in an ambulance. But the NFL wound up making EA remove the ambulance altogether many years ago for a specific reason. Now, when the ambulance came onto the field, this was a big moment in the game, especially if you were playing against friends. It was a bragging rights kind of thing that you were able to take your buddy's player out of the game. The ambulance would come cruising onto the field, but the great thing about it that everybody loved was that the ambulance would literally run over any players that were in its way. It would in fact technically injure more people in the process of taking away the original injured player. It was one of those things that made absolutely no sense, but it was a funny thing among Madden players. If you know kind of thing. It was a lot of fun while it lasted, but eventually the league wasn't having it anymore as they felt it just kind of glorified injuries a bit too much, which I guess does make sense. The NFL dropped the ban hammer on this in 2001, which somewhat makes that year's Madden game a little bit more special as it was the last version of the game to feature the ambulance. Now it's time to switch gears a little bit and dive into some more specific things that were banned from Madden, but these are all mostly things that were banned for ridiculous reasons. We can all understand why the violent stuff was removed from the game, especially since the game is rated E for everyone, and also just because it makes perfect sense for the NFL as a brand. But some of these things we're going to cover will simply just make you laugh. Let's start with player holdouts. This is something I see asked about every single year. Where are the player holdouts? Back in the day, it would be common for top players to hold out exactly like they do in real life. This was just another element that made team building / managing more realistic, but also more difficult. You had to juggle the different personalities of players, and that meant even having to deal with stars who wouldn't play until you gave in to what they wanted. Now, of course, we all know that EA has removed details like this in the past, but this one in particular wasn't their call. The NFL made them take this out of the game a good while ago, simply because they didn't want people thinking negatively of their players based on their personalities in a video game. Doesn't that sound a bit ridiculous? Does anybody play a sports game and think negatively on the real life player based on what he does in a virtual world? I sure don't know anybody who does, but the NFL is the no fun league for a reason. They take everything way too seriously. Speaking of taking things way too seriously, the next up on this list is something even sillier than the previous one. Have you ever seen a stadium in real life that wasn't full of people? Sure, we see it all the time, every season in fact. You ever notice that you never see that in Madden anymore? Do you even remember dynamic attendance in Madden? It was that long ago. I know some of you do because I see you asking about it every single year, but if you don't know about this feature, let me tell you about it. In Madden 11, EA added a feature that was known as dynamic attendance. What this did was it used a variety of factors to determine the fan turnout for any given game. So things like the team's record, the weather, and more would be a factor in how full the stadium got. If your team was 4-10, for example, and playing in 15-degree weather, fans would likely think twice before showing up on that Sunday. If your team just had a bad record in general, they might not show up in full force, reacting the same as real-life fans would. But that was all put to rest quickly as the NFL didn't like that very much. The No Fun League dropped the ban hammer once again, and we haven't seen dynamic attendance since, and probably never will. But the funny thing about this one is this wasn't just the NFL itself, it was more so the owners who had an issue with this. It's been said that the team owners weren't happy about seeing their stadiums empty in the video game, even though their stadiums were often not full in real life. This led to the NFL banning dynamic attendance in Madden, and this is why you always see a full stadium, even if the Giants are 1-13 and playing in the snow. This is another area that makes NBA games more immersive, as you'll often see arenas that aren't full when your team is struggling, or you'll see the arenas start to clear out early if a team is getting blown out. The NBA, unlike the NFL, is not clearly as strict when it comes to their video games, and maybe one day the NFL won't be so uptight either, but at this point, that's wishful thinking. Now it's time to switch gears once again and talk about arguably the biggest missed feature in Madden these days. And this one is a bit more controversial as the verdict is still out on whether or not this was an official NFL ban. There's a lot of mixed information on this. Nobody seems to know for sure, as we've heard some reliable sources on both sides of the argument, and I'm talking about the Create a Team feature. Create a Team is one of the most crucial aspects of sporting games these days, being able to expand your leagues, create your own custom teams, custom logos, colors, stadiums, you name it. This type of thing thrived in games like NCAA 14, Madden 2005, and currently thrives in games like NBA 2K and even NHL. Now, the rumor for a while was that the NFL banned this, but over time we've come to learn that it appears that they banned the ability to edit existing teams. The example that was used when this information broke many years ago was that the NFL didn't want to see the Raiders with a pink helmet. But in terms of creating your own teams, there's never been any official source that has said the NFL banned anything like that. And in fact, one of the former creative directors of Madden, Rex Dixon, said many years ago that they were never forced to remove the feature. After all, Madden does have over 30 relocation teams, which were even just updated this year, so the NFL clearly is okay with custom teams, and even the idea of relocating these teams and changing a current team to a completely new one. However, they have put the ban on editing existing teams to look different than their real life counterparts. And along with things like creating a team is also changing up divisions and things like that, or realigning the conferences. We've never gotten an official word on why we can't do that in Madden, but it would seem that that kind of goes hand in hand with this, as the NFL wants things to be more on par with real life. Now, my thoughts on this feature as a whole is that we'll likely see it return soon at some point, especially with the new NCAA football game coming out next year. That game will likely have a creative team, and then they can port that over to Madden. But I don't know if we'll ever see anything along the lines of NBA 2K, where you can literally upload your own logos, as I just can't see the NFL signing off on that based on how they operate. But a system where we have a bunch of pre-approved logos and assets to choose from, with the freedom of designing the uniforms and stadiums ourselves, would definitely suffice and would be worlds better than what we currently have. Up next on the list is something that will definitely anger a lot of Madden fans, especially in franchise mode, and this is customization, which is kind of what we were just talking about with Create a Team, but this is more along the lines of equipment. This is another thing that the NFL has been very strict on, and they're very strict on it in real life. We all know in real life, though, that players will kind of wear what they want sometimes, but the NFL will fine players for wearing this equipment that doesn't meet their very strict guidelines. Things like not wearing the right cleats or the right gloves is a quick way to have to pay a hefty fine over to the NFL office. Now, we've seen EA work their best around this lately and give us a good bit of what the NFL deems okay for players to wear, but the truth is we'll never see the crazy custom visors, custom cleats, or special gloves as long as the NFL has any say in this matter. We see all the time fans asking to get visors in the game with logos on them or different colored visors, or some of the crazy gloves or cleats that these players wear in real life, but if the NFL isn't allowing it in real life, they're definitely not going to allow the players to wear the custom gear in Madden where they actually have full control over it. Just recently, they made AJ Brown change his cleats during the game. So you know how seriously they take this. They're not going to let you wear pink cleats in Madden. This is also probably why we don't have the ability to wear pants above the knee or the option to not wear high socks, because technically in the NFL, you're not supposed to do that. It's a uniform violation, even though players do it all the time. But at the end of the day, EA is forced to comply with these uniform policies in game, as the people that control the uniform and the customization have said many times that they have to do what's in line with the NFL uniform policy, even if the real life players don't always do that. Now, this next thing on the list is a bit more controversial, but also a bit funny because it was later changed. I'm talking about none other than Colin Kaepernick. Now, I know everybody has a different opinion on the guy, but I'm here to just tell you the facts as it pertains to Madden. I'm sure most of you know about his situation with the NFL in the past that eventually led to him being in a lawsuit with the NFL, which eventually got settled. Now, he wasn't banned from Madden in the traditional sense. He was still in Madden games, and while EA didn't have his rights to use him after a certain point because he was no longer a part of the Players Association, EA did reach out and try to obtain his rights directly, but at the time it didn't work out. But that's not how the NFL tried to ban him from the game. Now, we have to go back to Madden 18 to talk about what happened. In the Ultimate Team game mode at the end of the year, EA does a program called Golden Tickets, where a number of lucky people get to create a player of their choosing and make him into a super version of himself, a 99 overall with completely maxed out stats. In Madden 18, many people were saying that if they got a golden ticket, they were going to create Colin Kaepernick, as he did currently have a base card in Ultimate Team from the beginning of the year, which normally was the requirement. As long as they had a card in the game mode, you could create him into a golden ticket. But that year, after this hype started to pick up over people creating a Kaepernick golden ticket, EA then came out and said that you could only create a player who was on a current NFL roster or a legend player that was released in the game mode that year. Now, this never seemed to be the case before, and would seem like the NFL stepping in and saying that this was a no-go, which made sense, I suppose, because at the time they were in a lawsuit, and if you're in a lawsuit with somebody, it's probably not a good idea to have that player's likeness being profited on in the game. But the fact that his base card was still available to be used in the game mode at any time kind of made things look bad. Fast forward to Madden 19, and then the next big viral moment happened for Madden. EA was caught censoring Kaepernick's name in one of the songs on the Madden soundtrack. After much uproar via social media and news websites picking this up, EA then came out shortly after and said it was a mistake, that whoever edited his name out misunderstood that while they didn't have the rights to his actual likeness, that they didn't have to actually censor his name from the song. But then come to find out they actually censored his name from a song on the Madden 18 soundtrack the previous year when they did have his rights. This one just kind of went unnoticed for the most part for a while until the later situation happened for Madden 19. EA just kind of had to take the bullet for this one, as we all know this definitely came down from the NFL because they were in a lawsuit in the guy at the time, but it just looked bad for everybody involved. But the funny thing is, if you fast forward a few years later, Madden 21, they brought Kaepernick back to the game, and not only did they bring him back, they made a big marketing deal out of it. They put his player likeness in the game. They made him a highly rated free agent that you could sign to any team in franchise mode. They put him in the yard game mode and gave him special gear that was centered around just him. Obviously, the NFL had to sign off on this, but it's just funny that previously they made him not usable in the game or censored his name, and then just years later made a big deal out of bringing him back to the game. But they probably figured that they were going to gain more than they were going to lose by bringing him back and making a big deal out of it, so they just pretended like the other stuff didn't happen and brought him back into the game. Now, a little bit earlier in this video, I also mentioned that there is an NCAA college football video game coming out next year, and if you want to know more about that, you can check it out right here on the screen.